Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business Podcast. I am your co-host, JP Jumpaz from the Two Man Power Trip. And of course, joining me is the wizard himself, Mr. Trump Mania, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. We've been so topical recently, of course, with our wonderful guests like Zach Arnold talking about the WWE sale, which has, or merger, I guess how you define it, which is just closed in the days that we're recording this, talking about wrestling video games. So excited to jump into the news this week.
Yes, a lot of stuff going on, of course, because of the TKO merger. It's coming out slowly. More and more executives are being fired. So they're expecting more wrestlers to be released. And obviously, this is what Endeavor does because that's what they did with the UFC. I mean, they trim down and make it a total profitable business for sure.
So somebody that people shouldn't cry for is Riddick, Frank Riddick, The Chronicles of Riddick. So
Hmm.
um, when the sale closed, he got $5 million. So I'm not sure if he's leaving on his own accord or is leaving to have a great time at a resort, but he's leaving very softly.
Yes. And it's funny, I saw some people, even some wrestling personalities, commenting like, "Oh, they feel bad for Triple H." I was reading what did he get? 12 million, something like that. When the sale went into effect, so like, yeah, I wouldn't cry too much, and he's still the COO and everything else. So I wouldn't cry too much for Triple H or think that he's not still in a good position. Like, come on.
It could, it's interesting. He might even end up in a better position just
Yeah.
because it's a bigger company and they've been putting him front and center with everything that they're doing, ringing the bell. I saw pictures of him at Fashion Week sitting with Jeff Bezos. So he seems to be doing really well. I mean, I don't know if I would feel bad for her either. I think she has a lot of options available to her if she'd like, but Stephanie is the one that was really pushed out and
Yep.
hasn't been heard from since. So really curious how that will all play out.
For
I
sure.
think well, that probably seemed a little foolish executives of the company that had left and then came back as part of Vince's board. They bought the bowling company and then they didn't join the new board.
Yep.
So what did they get out of it?
Very true. That is very true. Just interesting to see what else happens and what kind of further developments will happen with TKO, this Endeavor merger with UFC and the WWE. But as far as some other news is concerned, what's going on with New Japan Pro Wrestling and New Japan World?
So is it one of those things like too little, too late? Now that I'm thinking about it, it reminds me a little bit of like the cable companies when, that was one of the only options unless you got direct TV. And then some people in their neighborhoods were getting competitors like we had Optimum here and then Fios came. But people would always be like, can they improve this and that and so on? And not that New Japan World had a control of the market, but people were really into it for a while, but they'd be like, I'm sorry, I can't use it on the Roku, or I'm having trouble on this platform or that platform. And people were always making suggestions to like do better, and they didn't, and the market passed them by. And now they have this announcement of all these new things that are coming to New Japan World, both technology wise and so on. So New Japan Pro Wrestling's online streaming service will see a major renewal in the autumn with a wave of new features. Fans will be able to enjoy content on iOS, Android, and Roku TV apps, sample content in full HD, download video to watch offline, as well as benefit from improved search functionality and a suite of UI UX improvements. New Japan fans, new and old, will be able to enjoy action more than ever before. We're excited to bring you more details. Along with the renewal, there will be changes to the pricing plan. So, it's increasing as far as I gather. Current subscribers who continue their subscriptions after the service will be renewed will be charged 1,298 yen, regardless of territory, for their next billing period after renewal takes place. New Japan World continues its dedication to being the king of sports streaming. Current Amazon TV app will not be supported after renewal. After renewal, users will be able to download a new Fire app. Um, there may be a brief period where new account registration as well as account cancellations will not be available and so on. There's going to be Forbidden Door will be available on it. Will New Japan archives be available on their new service? Yes. Can I watch pay per view? I don't want to stay subscribed under the new price plan. What should I do? Those who wish to be unsubscribed to delete must do so before that date. I'm a continuing subscriber. Can I pay my subscription in US dollars? Subscribers continuing from the prior version will continue to be charged in yen under the new price. Convert to your local currency. The international price of $9.99 applies to new accounts only. We appreciate your understanding. Actually, I should have done this before. 1,298 yen to dollars. So let's see what the price difference is. It's actually, I mean, it could vary, but interestingly, it's actually cheaper. So they're like, no, you can't do the 9.99 anymore. You have to do it in yen. But when you look at the price in yen, it's $8.78. That feels like it summarizes well, like New Japan's efforts in America, like confusion, and in the end, they're losing out even
Yes.
more than if they had just stayed with a way that made sense to people.
It is one of those things, you're right, it might be too little too late just as far as like, man, years ago, everybody was clamoring for New Japan World, but it was so hard to do, and then they finally got the English so you could actually read what the hell you were buying, and then the technology wasn't great, and to where to watch it and how to watch it. I mean, it might be too little too late for the New Japan World.
Yeah, like there, for early adapters, there's like a cool thing for like figuring out how to do something, like not encouraging it, but some people are still into that with like, oh, I was able to stream this underground and I didn't have to pay $100 for the pay-per-view, or I was able to download, the full content or whatever it is. Like there's a small percentage of people that basically have nothing else to do that will focus on that. But for the semi-mainstream or even playing to your niche, which this would be, like the more complicated you make it, the more attrition that you have. There's always been a thing, like just with, like, let's say Google results. The first results on the top third of the page are what'll be clicked on. The more you go down the first page, like the attrition rate is tremendous. And if you have to click to page two, it's like such a small percentage. When you apply that for a technology where you often have to translate the page to understand what you're buying with merchandise or streaming services, where you won't even give a standard price in a US or international currency that relates to your region. It's just so complicated. And right, John, like Peel used to talk about that New Year's Eve show at the Tokyo Dome. Certainly when Jericho was there, most recently Kenny Omega and so on. Basically around when they literally you coming. So now, like that buzz is off. It seems like every time that they announce like how many subscribers worldwide there are to New Japan, it's always still around like 100,000, 120,000. But it's not growing. But I don't remember seeing that number in a little while.
So with New Japan World and doing that, does Ed have any sort of team up or any sort of working with AEW, or this is completely separate? It's got nothing to do with anything AEW or any AEW shows outside of the Forbidden Door.
Yeah. So interestingly, it doesn't mention it. And right, what's that show in Seattle that they're doing? That's a dedication
Wrestle
to an
Dream.
IP that
Yep.
Wrestle Dream. Thank you. That AEW is doing, and we don't like. They're like, oh, they'll bring in New Japan stars, but it doesn't seem to be based on that. It like has the feel, right? Like because you have what is it, Zack Sabre Jr. right?
Versus Brian
Like
Danielson. Yep.
Brian Danielson. So there's like sort of like a New Japan match type of feel, but not native New Japan stars. Zach Garland was sort of I wasn't sure exactly what he's getting at with, like, we know Bushiroad stock is down sort of like for New Japan's like standing right now. It seemed like very disrupted. So interesting to see how that all comes about. But they're like even years ago, right? Like when they would come to Ring of Honor, it was like the biggest thing. And those like it would spike Ring of Honor sales. They would sell a tremendous amount of merchandise. Now yes, those Forbidden Door shows are multiples of that. You're selling out a professional arena and doing a good buy rate with that and so on. But in general, certainly on average, New Japan's presence in North America is greatly diminished.
What about Impact Wrestling? They had their 100th episode, Victory Road, and Impact. Or sorry, not 100. Oh my God, I'm way downplaying it. Impact 1000.
Yeah, so um, our friends at WrestleTix did a count of the reserve seats. So the county center is one of those places I used to go. I wouldn't say all the time, but quite often. So there's tiers there. So they had 620 on the floor reserved right before for Victory Road was 614. So that was sold out, assuming that the next night 1000 was sold out. Now I don't know how many of the upper tier seats that they opened up, but um, Mike Johnson at PW Insider announced that it was no more tickets were for sale. It was sold out, but I think they cut it off at a certain point because it's a 4,500 seat venue, and Lou D'Angeli, when he posted pictures, smartly as a promoter, he gets the best angle. So it was definitely from the floor, like from the back of the floor to get that wide angle. If they had many people in the upper tier, I'm sure they would have gotten a full shot of that. So it's sort of like, I don't know if the Observer today, when that came out, had the attendance, but it certainly wasn't a full venue as far as I gather. However, they determined to sell out, sort of like you make it seem more exciting. You cut off the ticket sales a little bit early and say it's sold out. So when a few people are denied, I guess that builds a little bit of a buzz.
All right, joining us now, we have a very special guest. Michael Kane is
Hi.
joining us right now from the Kane Mills Media. What's going on, Michael? How you doing?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Hi, Michael. So nice to connect with you in person. Um,
Likewise.
uh, we were connected, of course, through a mutual friend, Timur, a great guy. And when he suggested that we connect, when I looked up your information, it felt like one of those Spider-Man memes where they're like pointing at each other. I was like,
Absolutely.
okay, we're both in the career coaching space. We're podcasters. We're
Yes.
wrestling people. So I was like, this could be some fun.
Oh no, it's wonderful to connect with you. It's funny. My role in the wrestling business is not necessarily in the business, which is a beautiful thing. I so just to give you some background, I took the beginner's course at Ohio Valley Wrestling in my mid 30s. So I relocated from Boston, Massachusetts to Louisville, Kentucky, and it was wonderful. I was terrible at it, but it was wonderful. I learned a whole ton. I met a lot of great people. There are some folks from my class who are still working today, including Stuart Perry, who wrestles as Amon with OVW, who's now featured in Wrestlers, and Rachel Ray Lynn, who's now working for Women of Wrestling out in Los Angeles. So it's some really good. Not to mention, part of our class was taught. Our main class was taught by Nick Dinsmore, better known as Eugene, of course. And one of the guys who helped out with the course was a our friend Truth Magnum of the Outsiders, which is just great to see those guys really doing so well now. Um, a lot of what I've done since has been just career coaching and general background advice. A lot of devil's advocate stuff for guys who I've made friends with over the years. So I just want to share a little bit of that today with you guys from perspective of how not only how I tripped into this occupation, but also how I can be of service to not only wrestlers but fans as well.
John is going to get to the bottom of it all, and then I'll
Yeah.
take over after that.
All right.
So where did you grow up and like when did you start getting into wrestling? I always find that wherever you grew up is kind of like, like say Northeast or WWF
Yes.
guys. So where did you kind of grow up and what wrestling were you into?
Sure. I grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, about 10 minutes south. And the best way to understand it was I was an ESPN child. So one would expect that I would have had an exclusively WWF, Hulk Hogan era background. Uh, but for the most part, I was watching the American Wrestling Association out of Minneapolis and World Class Championship Wrestling out of Dallas. That was what was on ESPN in the afternoon when I came home from school. So I grew up a lot on the Von Erichs and Jerry Lawler and Nick Bockwinkel and a lot of those folks. So again, not don't get me wrong. I did go to the old Boston Garden to see Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat and Tito Santana. But a lot of my early wrestling was informed by the late AWA for Good of Real and world class championship wrestling, which was just again super exciting. And with all the tragedy, there were so many high points, and it was just so entertaining. So I really had a really good early immersion as a fan.
Interesting though, a Northeast guy, not I know you like WWF, but you're more into the other stuff. That's very interesting for a Northeast guy.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, we also got the TBS Superstation, so we did get the late NWA, early WCW stuff as well. So we got all four of the majors at that time, and it was just fun. I never got into the tape trading. I never got into Japan. I guess I was just spoiled with a lot of the American wrestling that I had access to.
So how do you go from like a fan to kind of getting involved with wrestling business? How do you make the leap?
It's strange because I I didn't think of this until my 30s. I went to Boston College. I majored in philosophy and political science of all things. Super employable, I know. Worked in public policy for a little while, and then went to graduate school in Honolulu. I studied East Asian history. Again, really focused on spending that money on education and not necessarily not necessarily getting a job out of it.
Right.
But I learned a lot and had fun. I came back and I was working as a research assistant at a consulting firm in Boston. And actually, let me track back. I was working at a magazine in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the first time I went out to wrestling school, and my boss was ill, and the business had some struggles, but I was able to work it out so that I could work remotely for the magazine from Louisville, Kentucky. Because if I stayed in Boston and didn't try this, I was going to lose my mind. So I went out there. And the biggest thing I had going for me is that I knew I was never going to be John Cena. I knew that I was not a good athlete. I was in okay shape, but I wasn't in perfect shape. And until you get there, you don't realize what kind of shape you really need to be in, which is ring shape, and it's a whole different game. Uh, but I moved to Louisville and just went for it and wanted to be the next Gary Hart. I want, of course,
Yep.
a man with no hair and a regional accent wants to be Gary Hart, of course. um, but but I went for it. I took the class, and I missed our showcase for my buddy's wedding. Don't tell anybody. Came back here, never having had a match. Was frustrated with it, and really just stayed on as a fan. And I again went to work for a consulting firm, and always just kind of wondered what I was going to do. And I ended up back in Louisville. Tried again and got a little better, but ended up focusing on refereeing and learned a little bit on doing that. And once again, never used it. Came back here, and I through actually, interestingly enough, when I was at OVW, Taylor Hendricks was there, and we were the only two people from Boston. So she mentioned to me that if I wanted to learn while I was home, Brutal Bob Evans from Ring of Honor was available.
Yep.
And I emailed with Bob, and Bob held a super camp in Rhode Island a few years back. And I was the only guy that showed up wanting to be an announcer or a referee or more of a support guy. A lot of really talented folks attended that camp. A lot of really great instructors attended that camp. And it really lit a fire under me to be helpful to people in the business. I realized that, you know, for good or for ill, my role was not going to be largely between the ropes. It was going to be help. It was going to be helping people. It was going to be supporting them, not necessarily in designing a match, but in, hey, how are you doing with your career outside of the ring? How is what what Bob calls the Clark Kent job going? How's your website? How is your overall career and your overall life going? And really just being a friend to folks. I started Kane Mills Media, helping relatives with resumes. It was a kind of a casual thing, and I've now had the opportunity to help wrestlers and non-wrestlers alike with assorted career moves, resumes, LinkedIn, model job interviews, things of that nature. And it's exciting to kind of because again, the common thread I think is that it's ultimately a cooperative business, that everyone's putting their trust into everyone else's hands, and everyone is trying to do what's right by somebody else while doing what's right by themselves. And it's phenomenal. I mean, it's funny, a lot of the values that I've learned through wrestling and through friends in wrestling are things that have actually served me really, really well in dealing with people in all walks of life. So sorry, that's a long way of saying it, but thank you for asking. Yeah,
I'm going to hand it over to Lavie. He's got a lot of good questions for you.
thank you.
So, a very important topic developed even after we booked this this wonderful interview. In terms of big news, the TKO merger, WWE merging with UFC. I haven't had the chance to check the news today, but today is supposed to be the day, unfortunately, of a lot of people being fired. John and I talked about that Frank Riddick will be fine with his $5 million cushion, but
He will
whether
live. He will live, I believe.
yes, whether the wrestlers are let go today or soon, I think outplacement of professional wrestlers is something that's sorely lacking, something that at one point I thought about pitching WWE on. So I want to kind of stay there for a while, meaning
Sure.
that let's say you get a call after after this podcast from a friend who says 10 of my friends performers at WWE were just let go. They were at NXT. They've never been on the scene. They didn't have a chance to go to college. What should they do? Like, how would you break this down? What would you plan, and how can you support them?
Oh, sure. The first thing I'd do is try to get him on the phone. And when I did, I would remind them of all of the positive aspects of wrestling in their life, what they've learned. And if you take the functions of a professional wrestler, oftentimes what you have is someone who has worked with people from all diverse backgrounds, someone who has had to display some form of craftsmanship and leadership, someone who has set their own professional schedule, someone who's had to handle their own taxes and accounting, someone who's had to handle their own image and social media, someone who's had to run essentially a small what amounts to a small business, someone who's had to maintain relationships with people ranging from the owners of companies all the way to people who are lifelong customers of all ages. They've had to handle merchandising. They've had to handle logos and design. They've had to handle a million things that they don't give themselves credit for. So the first thing would be taking an inventory of what it is that you've done over the course of your career, and how do you break it down in terms of business functions, and how do you make that relatable. The second thing is, people are innately curious about wrestling in a way that I think wrestlers underestimate themselves in this regard too. That sometimes you'll have wrestlers that don't want to talk about wrestling when they're around people that they consider either professionals or serious. And it's like, no, I, I'll tell you, when I went to wrestling school in my 30s, when I came back for the wedding, I had people who were attorneys coming up to me saying, "Tell me all about this," almost as if I had escaped from the island of misfit professionals and had found some form of fountain of youth. People are inherently interested in wrestling. They're interested in your journey. They're interested in, how did you become inspired by something unusual and have the courage to pursue it? How did you become an entrepreneur? And sometimes, again, like you said, without the benefit of a college education, sometimes without the benefit of other types of professional training, but to still have the courage to learn on the fly and be an entrepreneur. So I guess what those two things have in common is really assessing what you do, and really just having a positive attitude about who you are and what you do, and having a more complete understanding that the world is going to open their arms to you if you show a willingness and openness to growth, and you show a willingness to apply the lessons you've learned.
So, one of the things that inspired me in terms of this idea years ago was that I found on LinkedIn somebody who's a director of career development for the NBA Players Association, who's been doing it about 17 or 18 years, coming from Columbia University. Directs and manages career development for 450 professional basketball players to assist them in developing the skills needed to achieve career success. So let's say TKO is doing some strategic thinking with Deloitte or Price Waterhouse or whoever they work with, and they're like, look at the WWE's track record, and even UFC fighters, which you've managed. There's so many tragic stories, which hurts your PR when you're bottom line
Certainly.
focused. That become issues that you have to manage, that become expensive issues if you're paying for rehab and so on. So what type of plan would you suggest to a TKO to implement in terms of whether it's post-career services as an outplacement or something built in initially? I know that WWE at least has come a long way in terms of teaching about fiscal responsibility and NXT and those sort of things, but what will it take to have people have not only a soft landing, but success whenever their career ends or starts winding down?
I always try to think of start with the end in mind. So start at the beginning with the end in mind. So one of the things is almost a form of preventative maintenance going forward, which would be that we know that the professional associations in major sports have sort of a boot camp that they put their athletes through with regard to personal finance, with regard to personal behavior and professionalism, things of that nature. I'd recommend, and I know, and I'm going to get to the guys now in just a moment, but I would recommend starting with that form of preventative maintenance from the very beginning, um, because the average WWE career, to my knowledge, is probably 3 years. I mean, we're not talking. I mean, John Cena is clearly the exception, not the rule. Brock Lesnar is the exception, not the rule. We're talking principally about a 3 year rotation at the top. So even if a person has a 15-year wrestling career, 12 of that is going to be spent in independent wrestling. So part of the assessment that these individuals are going to have to make, and WWE may have to help them with that, is how do they maximize their brand when they leave the WWE and return to either independent wrestling or some other related form of entertainment. Another thing would be I know there are companies out there like Guild Education and Coursera and edX that offer forms of continuing education. I would certainly continue in that vein. I know they have awarded scholarships to individuals. I believe Maria Canellis Bennett received a scholarship. Uh, I would pursue that more heavily, especially again. Once you start dealing with William Morris Endeavor, uh, y- you're really talking about world class operations here. You're talking about people who have dealt with not only athletes but entertainers again, like you said, have to maintain a high form of image. So I would certainly offer ongoing professional education. Another thing is, and this may sound a little controversial, but don't get me wrong, uh, health insurance. There's some form, I don't know whether it's a Cobra or some form of ongoing discounted health insurance if possible, to ensure that the talent can land safely on their feet, because an enormous part of what happens with a layoff is that people are losing not only their identity to some degree, but they're losing their routine. So and part of losing the identity and the routine is that sometimes physical fitness will slip, sometimes emotional fitness will slip, and other things. So you want to make sure that people can stay on a firm personal foundation as well. So I'd certainly prepare in that direction. Uh, one other thing would be networking. Have someone or some form of courses that and personal mentors who can help a person professionally network, utilizing their how well known they are through the WWE brand, through the TKO brand, through the UFC brand, uh, who can really leverage that to find a profession that suits them. I think sales is going to be huge for a lot of these folks. I think some of these folks are naturally gifted salespeople. I think some of these folks are going to find social media and digital technology. Some folks are going to go into entertainment, and some folks are going to find artistic and creative endeavors. I mean, just look at some of the stuff Jeff Hardy's done on the side. Really beautiful artwork, good music. I mean, there's so much talent in these folks that, again, like I said, give them some stability, give them a chance to believe in it, give them some training opportunities, and I think a lot of these folks are going to really pleasantly surprise everybody. I think that for all of for all the difficulties of the past, there's a lot of opportunity in the future.
I think there's, there's something to like a performance high of like having all eyes on you, like at a very very small degree, meaning like in working in higher ed, when I'm like speaking up there, and I have a mic
Yeah,
and everyone's listening to me, I'm just like, yeah, I enjoy this is great. And I can't imagine if that was my career and I was seeking thousands or millions of people to watch me. Do you like, from a step outside in terms of like another
yes,
profession, but maybe corresponding with people in the field, do you think like it's important that everyone checks their mental health after
thousand,
undergoing such an experience?
1,000%. That's excellent. I mean, above all else, checking one's physical and mental health is a big part of that inventory. You're right. Thank you for bringing that up. I should have made that clear. As a part of your personal inventory, taking responsibility for your personal and mental health, your relationship with the people in your life and the substances in your bloodstream, taking real inventory of your weight and your injuries and your routine, taking stock of, all right, well, how do I find a how do you're never going to find a substitute for adrenaline. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I've never heard anyone say that they found a substitute for being a rock star. I don't think there's a one-to-one relationship necessarily. However, there are people who have transitioned from one form of entertainment to another, or one form of life to another, who have done better than others have. And I think being grounded and having that kind of support and having a team that enables that you never suffer alone is going to be just critical. I think, again, part of that inventory has got to be physical and mental health.
Great, thanks. Let me turn it over to John.
So as far as OVW, did you watch the wrestlers? Did you? Because I know you
I
said you were
did.
pretty. What did you think?
I binge watched it yesterday, and I gotta say I love it, because I don't get me wrong. I don't want to compare, because I love Danny Cage and I love Monster Factory too. Um, with Danny and Monster Factory made me love all the people involved. Um, Wrestlers made me love the people and the wrestling. Again, part of it was probably sentimental, because I, just seeing the walk up to the Davis Arena, and seeing some of the same faces that were in the crowd in 2013 when I was there, and seeing some of the wrestlers who were the same guys when I was there. Um, it's a beautiful show, and I'm not saying, and I don't take that lightly. Aesthetically, it's filmed in a way that really makes wrestling attractive, but it also doesn't shy away from the reality of how hard the physical contact is. It doesn't shy away from how difficult it is what they do, and it makes it crystal clear. I really loved the fact that they chose to focus on the relationship between the art and the commerce, that Matt Jones on the commerce side and Al Snow on the art side, even though both were attempting some form of crossover just by necessity. I thought that interface was really well handled. Also, I gotta say, the featuring of Cash Flow was really great, because, well, two things. One, the last time I saw Cash Flow in person was after he had chopped somebody. I was 2 rooms away in a production room, and through 2 walls and 2 doors, I could hear it as if he was hitting me. So that chop. So
Wow.
when you hear his chops on that show, no, that's really what that's like. I'm blessed that he never chopped me. But to see a guy who's committed that much to the wrestling business over 20, 25 years, who really has been selfless to get featured, I thought that was great. Good to see Josh Ashcraft in the show, Brian Kennison in the show, again, Amon, and assorted other folks when I was there. I'm sentimental, because I really appreciate those guys and what they do, but at the same time, the flow of the show, it really is a lesson for anyone in athletics, anyone who's in art, or performance art in particular, or who's just an entrepreneur. because it really does show you the tension between the things that you want to do and the things that you have to do, the things that you want and the things that your audience wants. And it's, and again, to see how the human side of how people are just working their way through that and doing the very best they can, even under really stressful circumstances, it just makes the tension is, it just makes a great show. I would have enjoyed it if I wasn't a wrestling fan. I would have enjoyed it if I didn't know any of those guys and I hadn't been there. So I recommend it 100% to everybody.
Before we let you go, just pump up where everybody can find you and everybody can see you.
Sure. My company's called Kane Mills Media, but for branding purposes, I use a URL called badofficejob.com because my goal is to help you avoid a bad office job. I'm not afraid to recommend people to do all types of work. I'm not afraid to recommend people go and leave their bad office job and go get a good office job or a good non-office job. I really love working with people. I can work with anyone. I can work with early career, but my favorite is that mid-career folk, the guys and girls from 40 to 55 who aren't quite sure of what the next step is, but know that they're still hungry and really want to go for it and are willing to make some changes. I work more as a personal trainer and a concierge than I do a traditional coach. I'm not saying I blow a whistle into the phone, but I'm there to provide accountability, structure, and support, and I really love what I do. So please visit badofficejob.com. You can find me pretty much everywhere at badofficejob.com on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it all the time.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Take care.
All right, Lavie, let's continue with some of the news and some of the big topics here. What about AEW? Valuing at $2 billion. Is this true? Is this accurate? Is AEW worth $2 billion with a B?
Yeah, so Mike Ozanian, a reporter, and he said, based upon his reporting, that a $2 billion valuation is likely the minimum for that. So, sports properties and rights and entertainment, I think it's a unique creature. Often these prices like surprise me. What was it? The MMA company, Bellator,
Yep.
right? So
Oh,
they're
Belter.
a $500 billion valuation right now, or that's what's rumored that they may be acquired for. So, if you think about what Bellator is doing versus what AEW is doing, so I don't know. Like, what do you value a company like that's likely never been profitable, that's mostly reliant upon television deals with one primary distributor, that's sort of at the whims of that distributor, that's on the downward trend in terms of interest? We could see it, show to show. It's so dark except for Wembley. Even at Arthur Ashe here in New York, right? I think it's a few days out and they're about like 7,000 tickets. They're doing like some 2-for-1, so maybe that'll pick up. But the previous year it was double that, and the year before, right, it was sold out, so that was about triple that number. So I'm not meaning to be dim on them. They are the second brand in the US. I used to refer to it as the 1A. I don't know if like it should be 2, because it's pretty clear what number 1 is, and I guess there's still 1A because top talents will still choose to go to them. That some that have options elsewhere. It's not necessarily a secondary option. It's an alternative option for them. So sports rights are so hard to value. Like sometimes it's a multiple of the gross income an amount, but like profitability is an important thing. I don't think there's no reason to sell, and this is what Tony Khan is happy doing among all the other things that he's doing. So it's really more of an exercise, but it just shows sometimes how much sports can be valued. But for pro wrestling, often we'll hear like big numbers. Obviously, we have one proven right now, WWE, how much it was merged for or acquired for, depending on how you consider it. But right, there were rumors of like uh, ROH going for what was it, 40 million? And then Tony Khan was like, it wasn't more than Crockett was sold to Turner for, or something like that. And that was
Yeah.
like just a few million. So,
Yep.
who knows?
You never know. But if you look at it from one side of things, though, let's say Khan did put 100 million, or some people say it was 500 million, but I remember he said it was 100 million into AEW, and it's worth 2 billion. I mean, that's pretty substantial. I mean, that's a nice little turnaround there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say 100 million too. Like, I think it would be hard to like figure out how to spend 500 million that
Yeah,
fast.
yeah. Plus, I got to go by what he said, and you can't just throw out there
Yeah,
500. You know what I mean? You got to. He said 100. You kind of got to go by that.
yeah, it could happen. I think it's like if you're losing more than you're making, apparently, right? Then he's continuously investing. But it's not for naught. We've seen pro wrestling, like, why are they spending this money? Yes, you'll hit creative struggles. I think I have a note later about sort of like, booking wrong size venues. There takes time to catch up in that way, but it's not like all hope is lost. I'm not following it close enough week to week to know, like, oh, this guy should be the next contender, or this woman should be the champion, or whatever it may be. But you do see signs like, hopefully I'm saying the name correctly, Jade Cargill. Like, she was, really a breakout star with AEW. Now, apparently, we'll see, she's
Yeah,
going
maybe
to
WWE
WWE.
bound. Yeah.
So that's like a big loss for them. She was sort of like so unique and such a breakout star.
Yep.
And I know Gavin Bridge, our friend at Variety, has interviewed her a number of times. That it makes you question, like, what's going on here exactly.
So as far as big time wrestling, what's the latest?
So this is really indicative of something that we've been following for a while. These super feds that it seemed like that they used to have a lot more room for it in the market. Certainly, like NEW, Northeast Wrestling, was the leader in this. Time wrestling, it was like on and off. They really, although the changes in today's business are quite obvious, keep you up to date on what's happening with BTW. Since the new era began in 2006, we have strived to bring you innovative, action-packed shows with the greatest names in the history of sports, including Flair, The Hardys, Sting, The Ultimate Warrior, Dusty Rhodes, Funk, Steamboat, Bret Hart, and others. Currently, monopolies have limited our ability to book only the best talent on the best dates. But this will change. Everything runs in cycles, and we promise you we'll be back bigger and better and sooner than you think. So stay tuned right here. Keep the faith, BTW believers. So for a company that's sort of run on a brand names to lift itself, out of independent wrestling, or to be sort of the one of the biggest drawing independent wrestling shows on occasion, that doesn't have access to the talent they want, sort of what do they do? And that kind of begs the question, is there like a super indie anymore where it draws from like the biggest talents in all of pro wrestling? I would say that probably it's Game Changer Wrestling, right? Because for the most part, except for Nick Gage, where they had the announcement of him signing a contract, they're really drawing from talents from all over and finding ways to put it together. It doesn't feel like they're, like that it's not just ultra violence and so on, that they're bringing in, these top talents from all over the world, as I've talked about. I'm a big Masha Slamovich fan. Um, and they're making it work, but they're not reliant upon like, okay, come our brands is not like that this star is coming. Our brand is sort of like what we do, and we could supplement it with these stars to sort of pop things along.
What about the NFL and the CMLL? What the heck is going on with that?
So certainly, as we know, in Mexico, lucha libre is just a part of the culture. It's not like pro wrestling here where people are like, is it real? Is it not? Is it cool? Is it not? It just is. So the NFL, Alejandro Nava, head of licensing and retail in Mexico for the NFL, I believe, had posted, after 4 arduous months of planning, we had a special night with a great collaboration between CMLL and 6 NFL teams headed by the Denver Broncos to celebrate the start of our 2023 season and the 90 years of CMLL. Thank you, Berenice Herrera, CMLL, Marisol Villagomez, and our number of people. We did it. So it shows some cool pictures. NFL mascots in CMLL ring. We know that there was luchador appearances at the Denver Broncos game. I think I'm not sure if it was a preseason game in Mexico. So certainly the NFL smartly leaning on local culture to elevate itself, which is funny from a North American perspective, or Mexico is part of North America, but from an American perspective, the NFL just seems like a Goliath, and it doesn't need anyone here. Smartly, it hasn't traveled that well. Other places, yes, they do well in London and so on, but like going back all the way to NFL Europe, it's people don't understand all the rules and everything. They may have made some inroads in that, but they still need to lean on others to sort of get places internationally. Whereas like something like the NBA translates really well.
What about OVW? We were mentioning that before, obviously with Michael, but what about OVW Netflix? Was that going to help? Is that going to create some new stars? Is that going to elevate OVW to a number 3 brand?
Yeah, and everyone is talking about OVW, which is great. We're even talking about it today, and have interviewed people about it. I don't know with with a non-top promotion, sort of like what do you make out of it? Because if you make stars, they're going to go somewhere else. You can elevate the brand. I think what will probably come out of it is not necessarily just a wrestling star, but a personalities. It seems like, unfortunately, I don't have all the names in front of me. It seems like the mother-daughter duo are quite the characters.
Haley J and Maria, yeah.
Thanks. I have to check. I'm fascinated. I have to check them out. Previously, I actually I don't have Netflix, but I have to figure out subscription or something, because I'm really curious about that, just based on them. Of course, our friend Mr. Spectacular on there as well, but it'll put the spotlight on them, but I'm not sure if it'll like for a while. And I'm curious, like if they do another show like of some scale outside of Davis Arena, like if typically they draw, let's say for argument's sake, 125, if now there's 400 people there, like it's really curious. I think it's more something like this, like when you're already like the top of your field, like an F1 series, or certainly Ultimate Fighter, that what it did for UFC, then it can elevate you. But here, like we know that it's not the top wrestling, so there's like a certain ceiling for them. No matter what, it benefits everyone involved. But I don't know if it'll like put anyone in like in a bigger position in the end of the day.
What about TKO? Do they have a non-compete as far as what they could do with Endeavor?
Yeah, so Brandon Thurston was sharing some of the SEC filings. The governance agreement has a non-compete that protects TKO in the event Endeavor sells TKO. 5 years from today, or after that 6 months have hypothetically divesting, Endeavor can't invest in another wrestling or MMA company, nor negotiate contracts for wrestling or MMA talent. So 5 years from when they merged, so from the 12th, they can't, or 6 months after completely selling TKO.
Now, what is going on with this JCP, Joe Kazana Promotions, which I know very well down in Tennessee? What's going on? They have a special event and a big fair going on.
Yeah, so this is something that we come back to every once in a while, but that's rarely covered in other wrestling business news. There's this whole, fair season and events that, it tends to be guaranteed monies based on fair admission. So the Tennessee Valley Fair, from which I'm not sure about this specific event, but from what I imagine, these type of fairs, Chilawi Park, right? That was the old what was it? Fuller's, right? Colonel Rob Parker
Mm-hmm.
and his brother and his father and so on, right?
Yep.
I'm not sure if that park has been renovated or whatever, but like these are huge things, and whatever booking fee that you get, you could create a budget and then grow your company with that. And Mass Republic, they just announced, I think it was 4 days in Southern California, that they had a booking. They're getting a lot of appearances with taco and tequila festivals. Um, they have sold shows to Cathedral City, which I think is a casino, for their 7th sold out event. So people don't often talk about these type of events, but it's a big part of business, especially for niche or independent wrestling.
What about Ultimate Classic Wrestling? What's going on with the Savoldi Wrestling Library?
Yeah. So the Savoldis have launched Ultimate Classic Wrestling, available as a fast channel. It launched on Plex and it's planned to be on many more services. So a smart way to maximize their library, right? Like to get it out on Plex and get that ad money. I think like a pro wrestling channel makes sense. But what was it on Pluto, right? There was a wrestling channel and they could have basically unlimited number of channels, or they put up a lot of temporary channels for special events and so on, like a King Kong or Godzilla channel or whatever. But for whatever reason, that went away and it was folded into a FITE or sports channel. So you would think, like, if there's not a lot of cost, that this is like just a win-win, but it hasn't always worked out that way. But certainly a smart thing for them to try, and a way for people to experience wrestling that might not actively seek it out on YouTube or subscribe to something or have old DVDs or whatever. Here's somebody flipping through these fast platforms like Plex will be, oh, okay, classic pro wrestling. I used to watch that and like that. And then you get ad money. So it just seems like smart business.
And finally, does wrestling have mainstream appeal?
So, John, you can see the pictures with me. I had tweeted them, but this is a show, I think Appalachian Mountain Wrestling or maybe similar, that it's cute. You see like a little girl like being like in the front row, like super angry, whatever. She's gonna boo the heels, and you see like grandma and grandpa just like sitting there enjoying the show. Like pro wrestling, it's interesting. Like a lot of pro wrestling in terms of like what's mainstream, let's say like AEW, um, you wouldn't necessarily get those audiences as much, but here, like with the right promotion of a small town, just create excitement, and people that might not watch week to week or even know who people are will come out, and just like a traveling theater troupe, the wrestlers could play to the crowd, and it could be successful for everyone. So I think there are lessons there to be learned by mainstream pro wrestling. WWE is pretty good at being mainstream right now, but I think there's more ways to draw in broader audiences rather than people that want to watch 7 hours of WWE every week on television, or what is it, 5 hours of AEW, so about 12 hours over the air on the most distributed stations.
All right. So that is it for the news. Let's hit the plugs. You follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Check out the website, tmptempire.com. Lavie, what do you got?
Follow me on Twitter, Lavie Marg, LAVIE MARG. Check out my long form articles on linecubjobsearch.com. Check out our LinkedIn group, The Business of the Business, Pro Wrestling Industry. We are the official business podcast of SE Scoops, and we're distributed by the Creative Control Network.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be here right next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.